378 AD. The Roman Empire still appeared powerful, stretching across vast lands with confidence and control. But beneath that strength, cracks had already begun to form. Cracks that few could see, but that would soon be impossible to ignore. This is the story of a battle that would expose those weaknesses, the Battle of Adrianople. It began when the Goths, a desperate Germanic people, arrived at the borders of the Roman Empire, fleeing from the advancing Huns. A force so terrifying that entire populations chose escape over resistance. With no homeland left, they begged for refuge. Emperor Valens allowed them to cross the Danube and settle within Roman territory, believing they could be managed, controlled, and eventually turned into loyal subjects of the empire. But what followed was not protection. It was exploitation. Corrupt Roman officials took advantage of their suffering, selling them rotten food at unbearable prices and pushing them toward starvation. Desperation grew so severe that some were forced to trade their own children just to survive. What began as suffering slowly transformed into anger, and that anger, over time, turned into rebellion. From that chaos, a leader emerged, Fritigern. He understood something the Romans did not, that this was no longer about survival within the empire, but survival against it. He united the Goths, turning a scattered group of refugees into a determined fighting force. At first, the Romans underestimated them. To Roman commanders, they were nothing more than weak refugees. Disorganized, desperate, and easy to defeat. But as clashes increased, that illusion began to fade. The Goths were not breaking. They were adapting, growing stronger, more disciplined, driven not by ambition, but by necessity. Meanwhile, Emperor Valens grew impatient. Reinforcements were on the way, but he did not want to share the victory. Driven by pride and urgency, he made a decision that would define the outcome of the battle. He chose to attack without waiting. In the scorching heat of the summer of 378 AD, the two forces finally met near Adrianople. The Goths positioned themselves carefully, protecting their non-combatants and holding their ground with discipline. The Roman army, though experienced, arrived exhausted, drained from a long march under the burning sun. Armor weighed heavily, thirst spread through the ranks, and fatigue began to take its toll. Still, Valens pushed them forward, convinced that victory was within reach. But Fritigern had no intention of fighting on Roman terms. Instead, he delayed the battle, stretching time, slowing momentum, and waiting for something the Romans did not fully realize was missing: his cavalry. As Roman soldiers stood in formation, exposed to heat and exhaustion, their strength began to fade. What seemed like a simple delay was in reality a calculated strategy. And then, everything changed. A small clash broke out, unexpected, uncontrolled, and within moments, the battlefield descended into chaos. The Goths surged forward with sudden force, locking the Roman army into a fight they were not ready for. And just as the Romans struggled to stabilize their lines, a cloud of dust appeared in the distance. The Gothic cavalry had returned. Charging at full speed, they struck the Roman flanks with devastating impact. Formations began to break. Orders were lost in the noise. Panic spread rapidly through the ranks. Exhausted, overheated, and now surrounded, the Roman army began to collapse. Amid the chaos, Emperor Valens realized too late that he had made a critical mistake. This was no longer a battle he could control. It was a disaster unfolding in real time. And as the fighting intensified into a storm of blood, confusion, and destruction, the fate of the Roman army and the empire itself hung by a thread. The battlefield had turned into a nightmare. Dust filled the air, rising from the pounding of thousands of feet and hooves. Visibility dropped. Commands were lost in the noise. What had begun with confidence was now dissolving into fear and confusion. The Roman army was breaking. The Gothic cavalry had struck at the perfect moment, crashing into the Roman flanks with speed and force. Their timing was not accidental. It was the result of patience, coordination, and a deep understanding of the battlefield. Surrounded and disoriented, Roman soldiers struggled to hold their lines, but the structure that once defined them was gone. Units were no longer connected. Orders no longer reached their targets. What remained was not an army, but fragments trying to survive. Fritigern watched as his plan unfolded exactly as intended. He had delayed the battle, waited for the right moment, and forced the Romans into exhaustion. Now, every advantage had shifted. His warriors advanced with relentless determination, not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival. Behind them were their families, their future, and the memory of everything they had lost, and that made them unstoppable. They pushed forward again and again, breaking through Roman defenses, tightening the pressure, leaving no space for recovery. Every attempt by the Romans to regroup was met with another wave of attack. The battlefield was no longer a contest. It was a collapse. In the middle of that chaos, Emperor Valens found himself trapped. Surrounded by a small group of guards, he tried to regain control, shouting orders that disappeared into the noise of battle. But there was no response, no structure left to command, no army left to lead. In that moment, the reality became clear. This battle was lost. As the Goths closed in from all sides, the Roman army completely collapsed. Thousands were cut down where they stood. Others tried to escape, only to be overtaken by cavalry and struck down as they fled. The legions, once the symbol of Roman strength, were now powerless. The battlefield became a field of destruction, covered with fallen soldiers, broken shields, and scattered weapons. The sounds of battle slowly faded, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. And somewhere within that chaos, Emperor Valens disappeared. No one knows exactly how he died. Some say he fell in the fighting. Others believe he was wounded and carried into a nearby building, which was later set on fire. But the truth was never confirmed. What remained certain was this: the emperor was dead, and Rome had suffered one of the most devastating defeats in its history. By sunset, it was over. The Roman army had been almost completely destroyed. What was once considered unstoppable had been shattered in a single day. The illusion of Roman invincibility was gone. For the Goths, it was survival. For Rome, it was something far greater, a turning point. The Battle of Adrianople did not just end in defeat. It marked the beginning of a slow and irreversible decline. It exposed the weaknesses of the empire, showed that even Rome could be broken, and changed the balance of power forever. History would remember this battle, not just for its destruction, but for what came after.